Well spoken, well spoken. Right now, we're going to announce the panelists. Again, my name is Danielle Davis. I'm going to be your MC for tonight. And coming to the stage, we have Trail Frazier, Marcy Rogers, Amelia Hatfield, Melissa Cockrell, Joe Caudrew, Wayne Johnson. Please welcome our panelists. And now that the family is at the table, I want to have everybody stand up for me and give a warm, excitable welcome to our hostess, to our queen, Erin Patrice. Yes. Welcome in, welcome in. Come to the table. It is time to have our discussion. It is time to have some thought-provoking questions to be answered. Yes, thank you. Woohoo! Yes! Erin Patrice, ladies and gentlemen. Love you, girl. Get ready, because it's about to get started.
Hello, everybody. Are y'all good? Okay, all right, all right. Okay, everybody comfortable up here?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Make sure I'm not getting any type of feedback. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you all have chosen to be here with us today. Thank you, panelists, for coming and sharing this conversation with me. So, we're going to get started. Today, we are talking about empathy and tolerance. So, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Emotion researchers generally define empathy as the ability to sense other people's emotions and the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. Compassion is not the same as empathy, though the concepts are very much related. Let's see, we did this on double back. Okay, and then tolerance allows the existence, occurrence, or practice of something that one does not necessarily like or agree with without interference. So, I don't know about you all, but for the last few years, I think we've all been a little tolerant of each other at times and tried to exercise a little bit of empathy. So, we're gonna go ahead and get started with the conversation. Y'all ready?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So, I wanna ask you all, what's the difference between empathy and tolerance to you? Like I said, the last couple years has been interesting for all of us, to say the least. And I think that we've tried to tolerate each other in different ways, right? And show a little empathy at times. What do you all think the difference is between empathy and tolerance from your personal perspectives?
Well, I think empathy is the ability to meet people where they're at, no matter what them indifferences are, what our culture may be, even the color of our skin, and respecting that space that them people come from. Being a Nishnabek, I practice that when I enter the dominant world every day, right? Because I have to walk in the duality of being a Nishnabé. But then I still have to operate in the Jaganash world, right? The white man's world. In order to do that, I have to meet people where they're at. In order for my survival, also for my own empowerment and growth. So to me, that's the number one thing with empathy, is meeting people where they're at, and understanding first and foremost that we're all healing from some sort of trauma, every one of us. Some of us carry a generational trauma. I think once we understand that we're all trying to heal from something, I think that makes us a little more tolerant.
Yeah, thank you. Melissa,
Yeah.
you have something to say?
I do. So I think empathy is understanding that people have all come from different areas, different backgrounds, but you can understand that you've also been there. So you can empathize by showing similarity or understanding their feelings and reactions and emotions. I think tolerance is identifying as part of your emotional intelligence that you may not be able to understand where they're coming from, but you can tolerate that it's different and still accept that. I just think that the two kind of go hand in hand at times, but I do also just think it's important to identify those as part of your emotional intelligence toolbox, if you will.
Yeah, because some people tolerate people all the time, right? But they don't have a lot of empathy, so, which is go ahead, Wayne.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I couldn't agree more with the two of you. And yeah, you're 100% right. Is people do tolerate so much without being empathetic.
Yeah.
And yeah, we see it every day, especially with now. We're coming into Pride Month. We're seeing so much hate just based off of ads for a beer can, and people are trying to tolerate that, but there's no empathy behind it because there's still that hate.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would kind of add to that. I mean, I think I've had the privilege to work with a lot of different community leaders here, including Aaron, and I think many who are in the audience as well. But I actually worked with and sat through a presentation by Mike in the audience, and as well as Katie, who I think is here too. But they talked about how this importance of saying, when you're having a conversation with somebody, saying like, how did you come to get to this point?
Yes.
And I think that really builds on what they're saying, where like empathy is this act of like taking it one step further and really getting to understand where somebody's at in order to like actually meet them where they're at.
Yeah, it's that why and how, right? Like, why do they feel like that? How did they get there? Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yes. Being empathetic with somebody, you have to gain an understanding of who they are as a person and their background and where they're from. If not, you can't have empathy for them. If they're going through something, a hard time or anything like that, you would have to understand. You would have to been through that situation to gain empathy. So just understanding who that person is, you can gain empathy. And then to tolerate them, I work with a variety of people, a different bunch of people, right? So we have a guy, and he has this wacky personality, and a lot of people, look at him and be like, well, he's this, he's that. And I look at him and I'm like, well, he's a funny guy. You know what I'm saying? I like him. I actually like him. So just understanding who they are and being able to tolerate that through empathy and understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I need empathy and tolerance in this moment. Is my mic working?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome is real. Like, these people have said so many wonderful things that I'm like, how did I get here?
Marcy.
I feel very empathetic, and I feel like I've even thought, I thought in my past that I was like an empath, and then through some necessary classes and whatnot, I'm like, maybe it's childhood trauma. Maybe it's not, I'm an empath, but like I'm on high alert, or I've had to be on high alert. So I'm very, like, I said something to a few of you guys that I just met because like the vibe changed, and I was like, what is going on? What's happening right now? And so I feel like I'm an emotional creature, and I feel a lot of feelings. And so one thing I have discovered about myself recently is when I lacked, empathy for someone, or I lacked tolerance, where I had zero tolerance, it did exactly like you said. It had something to do with my experience, or my past, or my childhood trauma. It may have been the situation I'm thinking of triggered me in such a way, and I believe you mentioned this in our email, is that I identified with the child in the situation, or with the abused.
Just pause for a second, because I want to get
Pause.
to that. Yeah.
Okay,
Don't
I'll
steal
just
my
go
thunder,
on.
Marcy.
Can I just add something?
I'm just proud that something came out of my mouth. I'm just, woo! Thank
We got you.
You're doing good.
Can I just add something? So I know like a theme is to be empathetic, we have to have these lived experiences. I don't know what it's like to be a single mom, right? Because I'm a man. So I don't have that experience, but I can empathize with somebody that's experiencing that. So I think that sometimes we put too much onto that, compare. When we're comparing, we're not validating that person. And I think that's important, that we validate that person's feelings or their experience or how they view the lens. And I don't have to experience it to be empathetic.
Right.
The other thing is, I don't tolerate white supremacy, right? And nobody should be expected to tolerate that. So I want to make sure that we're saying, well, you know, on those moments where I'm intolerant, it's because of something in my past. Well, no, some of us have morals and we view the world as this equal spot we're supposed to have and we're willing to fight for it. So that makes me intolerant on anything that's going to take that away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So, the next question is, does what we see in others reflect what we see in ourselves? And it kind of goes into what you were talking about, Marcy, right? And does that limit or pause our ability to be empathetic towards them? And what I mean by this, for example, is that if you were abused or mistreated as a child, is it hard for you to tolerate or show empathy towards an abuser, right? Naturally, your empathy may go towards the abused because that's who you relate with, who you relate with. So are you able to show empathy or even tolerate the abuser? And that's just an example, but I think sometimes empathy is easy for us, and this is just my perspective, when it's something that we identify with or that we have, right, this soft spot for. But are we able to show empathy for people who we may not have that soft spot for? So I want to get what you all have to say. Do you want to continue?
Well, I found that out about myself because there are certain things, and I'm talking like on a smaller scale. I'm not right now speaking of like white supremacy or something like that on a larger scale, but just to keep it real personal, I found out about myself recently that a situation that I did not want to tolerate and I had no empathy for the person, it reflected on my past. It reflected on what happened to me in my childhood. And then when that clicked, I was like, oh, okay. There were other subjects came up, other instances came up where I could have empathy for that person in a different situation, and I learned to tolerate that person. But that was something I learned about myself, that, oh, this is a reflection. This is why I react in this way.
Sure.
This is why this affects me so deeply.
Yeah.
And so I was, maybe that helps someone in the audience or whatever, but I just realized that. I put that together recently. Learning things later in life, it's like, why didn't I learn this? Why didn't I learn this
as long
before?
as we learn it, as long as we learn it.
Yeah, never too late.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's a real thing, right? Where we realize that things do trigger us and things that happen to us bring up some old emotion. And so that's why I really want to know, is it easy or hard for us to show that empathy on the other side of it?
Personally, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of gray area with it.
Sure.
Because, you know, let's say you have gone through abuse as a child, and then you see it in your adult life. You know, seeing a child going through that abuse. You know, personally, I go into thinking, you know, who hurt you, the abuser?
Right.
Who hurt you to make you have to do this? Yeah. But then, I mean, if you go to more extreme cases as like sexual assaults, you know, that for me is really hard to be like, to show empathy towards or tolerance towards, because it is such a big ordeal. It's such a big thing that you are now taking away from somebody else's life.
And we know that studies show that people who abuse oftentimes were abused, right?
Yeah.
Sexually assaulted. They were them too sexually assaulted. So, So thank you for sharing that part.
Absolutely.
But it's hard.
Yeah.
None of this is easy. I'm not saying that any of this is easy. So, yeah, Melissa, you have something you want to
Yeah,
add?
I do, yes. So I'm gonna be honest,
Yeah,
no,
please.
I can't tolerate it, I can't empathize, I can't sympathize. I have lived through some pretty dark things that were unfortunately out of my control. And so for me, I am an empath through and through. I can feel the feelings in the room, honestly, right now. So for me, you know, seeing a child and seeing that, I can empathize very heavily with them. And it's hard because I do understand that something happened to that person to get them to that point, but you can stop the generational trauma. It doesn't have to continue with you. It can stop with you. It stopped with me. So I have a hard time tolerating it or even understanding, because I'm like, you could have changed that though. You could have been the person to stop that. So.
Yeah, and I'm happy you were, strong enough to be able to do that.
Thank
right?
you. Yes,
Yeah, for
thank
sure.
you.
Does anybody want to add something before we go into the?
Yeah, so much like Marcy. Yeah. So I had a later in life epiphany, and as a social worker, it's funny, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine. I never planned to do any of these things that I do now, I never asked for it, I never wanted it, it just kind of happened, And I tell my therapist, he'll tell you that I'm one of only a few people that scored a 9 out of 10 on the ACEs test that's not in jail or still alive. I have 2 college degrees. It hasn't been easy. I was a ward on the state. I was sexually abused. I wasn't able to do those things that I do today until I healed. And then I worked for CPS. And I worked with people that were having serious child abuse allegations against them, But they still had constitutional rights, and they still had this thing called human dignity. No matter what, my job was to swab them and check their home. My job wasn't to be the judge, jury, prosecutor, or the sheriff's department. They still had a right. And they were still to be treated as human beings and respected, no matter what, because that was my job. It's like that now, So I was abused a lot by the church. And I work with people that identify as Christian or Catholic every day. I'm still allowed to help those people, right? Because if I wasn't healed, that would trigger me, and I'd shut them down, right? Oh, I'm not helping this person get food. They can pray for food, right? I mean, if we were doing tit for tat, that's how it would go, right? So I think that ability to sympathize with that opposite side it requires that person to be healed from whatever that experience that they just triggered them. They have to be healed from that in order to help others.
And that is definitely a personal decision, right? You have to, you have to personally work.
It takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication, absolutely.
Absolutely,
And
it does.
it's not easy. It's not easy.
And it's continuous work.
Yep.
Yes. So my next question is, I want to ask you all, do you feel like we measure empathy? And let me explain to you what I mean by that. So this is something I remember very, very clearly, is that when the Ukrainian war started, right? When that started, at the same time was when gas prices went up. Y'all remember that? It was like this, gas prices went up, the Ukrainian war was happening at the same time, and I remember this meme going around on social media that said that you don't get to, well, they use some different words, but you don't get to complain about gas prices while people are being bombed in Ukraine. And I remember that meme going around everywhere. And a lot of it had to do with political stuff, right? Because it was political parties arguing back and forth. But I remember thinking to myself when I saw that, why do we have to measure our empathy? Why do we have to decide who gets it? Why can't we say that, wow, that is terrible that is happening over here? And it's also sad that someone that relies on gas, right, for their job to get around, or if they don't have a lot of money, right, that they too can be having a hardship. And I remember thinking about that, like, why do we measure? Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to pick these sides of who gets to get it when we can just give it, right? We can just give it. So what do you all think about that? Do you think that we do that a lot, where we measure, and I think some of you all kind of alluded to that, right? Where we say this person gets it, this person doesn't. So why do you think we do that?
Selfishness.
Okay, go talk, Wayne.
I mean, I've been on this earth for 29 years, and seeing the crap that we all go through on a daily basis, it's always, what's in it for me, why me, woe is me. Whereas, I didn't grow up wealthy. I, all of my shopping was done at Walmart or Kmart or sometimes the dollar store. But I had a roof over my head, I had food in my stomach, I had a good education. I had parents that loved me. There are so many people out there who have it worse off than I did. But, as a kid, I would think that I was the worst off in the world. But looking at it now, it molded me into the grown adult that I am. So I think it has to do a lot with selfishness. We don't want to think about somebody else. We want to think about ourselves.
I think it has a lot to do with racism because these same people had no problem when Syria was getting bombed or Iraq or Afghanistan. But when white people are, suddenly America opens up their hearts and their borders. We still have kids in cages coming from South America. America suffers from what I call white savior complex. Instead of looking at themselves and reflecting and saying, hey, we are the causes of all these things, it's, hey, we can help save these people for 99 cents a day. Just give us your credit card and you get this cool blanket and you get to go tell your friends how good of a person you are. That's a savior complex, and that's the problem.
And so, and with empathy, right, when we measure it, going back to what you both are saying, for me, you know, I agree with you on some levels, right, of stuff that, I mean, historically, we know that some things have happened, but that is so much deeper than that, right, when it comes to us divvying out, you know, compassion to people. And so I always wonder, why do we feel the need that we have to do that? Where is this written where we have to figure out, if I give this person this much, I can't give this to that person? Did you want to add something to that?
I was just going to say, I definitely think that I agree with some of the things that have been said, and I think that and for me, it comes to mind two reasons maybe why we do this. One, kind of selfishness, like what was mentioned. I know personally I tend to be a stubborn, narrow-minded person, definitely something I could work on, but there's that, which I think is definitely, we tend to just think about situations through our own perspectives as opposed to somebody else's. But then I also think that coming from a younger perspective here, we are kind of raised with it to an extent. If you think about, like, I think about in the school system how we are, like, comparison is just so relevant, and I think that constantly through whether you're doing classes or extracurriculars or whatever, I think there's always some underlying sense of comparison that could definitely contribute to this mindset of, you know, measuring empathy and comparing how you fall with regards to somebody else.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Anybody want to add anything else?
Wayne and Amelia said it best. You know, it's kind of a what's in it for me kind of thing. But I believe we shouldn't even measure empathy at any capacity. You know, you can have something going on and I can empathize with you. You might be a positive person who work hard, and I should have some type of understanding of that if you're going through a hard time. Yeah. Or if you need gas to get to where you got to go through transportation. You might got to go to school. You might have to go to work. You might have to pick up your child. I might have only work. I should be able to empathize with you and your hardships and what you go through. So we shouldn't measure empathy. We should just gain an understanding of others.
You want to add something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that a lot of your development of empathy comes from things you've experienced, or, you know, the hardships you face, basically. Now, I can sympathize, so saying that meaning I might not understand where you're coming from or something that you're going through, but I can sympathize. My heart is with you. That is definitely difficult, and I could not understand that. Yeah. So I think that it's hard for people to differentiate the two, but I do think a lot of empathy comes with you can relate to something a little bit closer. So the gas price thing, that's a great example, because I think people are like, this is here and now, this is in my face, and I know exactly what it's like. Whereas the bombing, you know, they were like, I can't understand, but that is still, you know, my heart is with them, things like that. Yeah. So I think it's kind of difficult, but I also think that people feel like they need to justify everything. Yeah. So when they're like, well, I empathize with this person because I went through that and it was really hard and XYZ, la-di-da-di-da. You don't have to explain yourself. You do not. If you say, hey, my heart is with you, I understand what you're going through, that's enough. That's more than enough. But it's just the idea of understanding that I went through that, so my heart is with you, we can relate, there's similarities there, or saying, you know, I can sympathize with that. I don't know what that's like, but I still feel for you.
Yeah, and I think that, like, for me, if a person decides, right, who they want to give empathy to, I'm okay with that, whatever, right? But the problem that I have is when we shame the other person, right? So it was this shaming going on with that, where it's like, you know, you don't get to complain about that because stuff is happening over there. It's like, well, give me a break, you know? I mean, you know, but and people were very emotionally driven by that, and I get it, right? It was a very heightened time with politics, so I think it was more of a political thing. But it just it just did something to my brain, and I said, wow, this is really interesting how we feel like this fight of who we get to care about. You know, we can care about everybody. So, it's really interesting because I think about, you know, our past show that we did, Agree to Disagree. And do you think that that is something that needs to happen sometimes? Is it helpful when tolerating others, right? Because there's people, I mean, in all of our lives, I'm sure that we tolerate, right? And I'm sure people tolerate me. You know, I'll probably walk space and they're like, okay, you know, and people probably tolerate me. So it's a thing that happens to all of us, right? Do you think that agreeing to disagree will help with that sometimes with tolerating people? And I know there's different levels to it. Like some of the stuff that you mentioned, Joe, those are some things that are like straight convictions that people have, that there's no gray, right? But in some things, I mean, because we talked about some really big things, but there's some things that happen every day in life that we tolerate people, you know, based on, you know, political things or, you know, where they go to church, or if they go to church, if they don't go to church, or if they, you know, like this type of music they like. So do you think that sometimes agreeing to disagree will help with that, with us being able to tolerate each other a little bit better?